You call that a career, Jimmy? You think sitting behind a desk, giggling like a schoolboy, makes you somebody? I've bled for this craft, poured my soul into every frame, while you toss cheap jabs to scrape a laugh. Shame on you, Fallon, for thinking you can mock a man's life work and call it entertainment. Tom Cruise's voice thundered across the studio, his eyes blazing with a fury that silenced the audience. The air crackled with tension, the kind that makes your skin prickle as he leaned forward in his chair, fists clenched, staring down Jimmy. Fallon. What had started as a routine talk show appearance to promote Tom's latest blockbuster had spiraled into a battlefield, and nobody was ready for the war about to unfold. The trouble began when Jimmy, with his trademark smirk, decided to poke at Tom's decades-long career. It wasn't the usual playful jab about action stunts or Scientology whispers. No, Jimmy went deeper, sharper, cutting into something raw. He'd brought up an old interview from the 90s, a clip where a young Tom stumbled over his words, nervous and green, pitching his first big role. The audience chuckled as the grainy footage played, but Jimmy didn't stop there. He mocked Tom's early ambition, calling it desperate, a kid begging for a spotlight he didn't deserve. The words hit like a slap, and Tom's smile vanished. He sat rigid, jaw tight, as Jimmy leaned back, laughing, oblivious to the storm brewing across the desk. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Tom said, his voice low now, dangerous, like a predator sizing up prey. "You dig up a 20-year-old clip to make me look small, but what have you got, Jimmy? A few years of late-night gags? You're a clown, not a creator." The audience gasped, some shifting in their seats, unsure whether to clap or cringe. Jimmy's grin faltered, but he doubled down, sensing the crowd's energy. "Oh, come on, Tom. It's just a bit of fun," he said, his tone dripping with false innocence. "Can't you take a joke?" "That's what we do here, lighten things up." Tom's eyes narrowed, his voice cutting through the forced cheer. "Fun? You call humiliating a man's struggle fun? I was 20, pouring my heart into this business while you were probably still cracking jokes at high school talent shows." The stage felt smaller, the air thicker, as the two men locked eyes. Jimmy, usually quick with a quip, seemed caught off, guard by Tom's intensity. He tried to pivot, tossing out another barb about Tom's relentless work ethic, implying it was obsessive, unhealthy even. "You're like a machine, Tom. Don't you ever relax?" Jimmy said, chuckling, but the laugh sounded hollow. The audience sensed the shift, their murmurs fading into an uneasy quiet. Tom leaned closer, his voice steady but laced with venom. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't a game to me. Every role, every stunt, every sleepless night, that's my life. You don't mock a man's life and call it a punchline." Jimmy's face twitched, a flicker of unease breaking through his polished host persona. He glanced at his producers off stage, expecting a signal to cut to commercial. But none came. The show was live, raw, and spiraling out of control. Tom wasn't done. He stood up, ignoring the chair scraping loudly behind him, and pointed at Jimmy. "You think you're safe behind that desk, don't you? Hiding behind your little jokes. But you're not untouchable. You crossed a line tonight, and I'm not here to play your fool." The audience erupted, some cheering, others whispering, as the tension reached a boiling point. Jimmy, for the first time, looked genuinely rattled, his hands fidgeting with a pen. He opened his mouth to respond, but Tom cut him off, his voice rising. "You want to talk about my past? Let's talk about yours. What's it like, Jimmy, knowing your whole career is built on tearing others down?" Jimmy Fallon froze, his pen slipping from his fingers, clattering onto the desk. The sound echoed in the silent studio, where the audience held its breath, waiting for his response to Tom Cruise's biting words. Tom stood tall, his presence commanding, his eyes locked on Jimmy, like a hawk circling its target. The accusation that Jimmy's career thrived on tearing others down hung heavy, and for a moment it seemed Jimmy might crumble under its weight. But then his lips curled into a sharp, defiant smirk, and he leaned forward, ready to strike. You want to talk about my career, Tom?" Jimmy said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, loud enough to carry to the back of the room. "At least I don't run around pretending I'm saving the world with every movie. You act like you're some kind of hero, but you're just a guy chasing applause, same as me." The crowd murmured, some shocked, others egging him on with nervous laughs. Jimmy sensed the attention and pushed harder, his words cutting deeper. "You think you're above this? Above a little fun? Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with being perfect, you'd see we're all just trying to make a living here." Tom's face tightened, his hands balling into fists at his sides. He took a step closer, the space between them shrinking, electric. "With hostility. You call this a living?" Tom shot back, his voice steady but sharp, like a blade slicing through the noise. "You sit there night after night, poking at people's scars, their struggles, just to get a cheap laugh. That's not a career, Jimmy. That's a parasite feeding off other people's work." The audience gasped, a few clapping before falling, silent again, caught in the raw intensity of the moment. Jimmy's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of anger. He stood up now, matching Tom's stance, the desk no longer a barrier between them. "Oh, spare me the high horse, Cruz," he snapped, his voice rising, losing its polished charm. "You think you're untouchable because you've got a few hit movies? I've been in this game just as long, and I don't need to climb cliffs or jump out of planes to prove I'm somebody." The jab was personal, a dig at Tom's reputation for daring stunts, but it backfired. Tom's eyes blazed, and he stepped even closer, his voice low, almost a growl. "You don't get it, do you? I do those things because I respect the craft, the audience, the people who pay to see my work. You just take the easy road, mocking others to hide how little you've got to offer." The studio felt like it was shrinking, the air thick with the weight of their words. The audience was riveted, some leaning forward, others whispering to their neighbors, unable to look away. Jimmy, sensing he was losing ground, tried to pivot, his tone shifting to mock sincerity. "Look, Tom, I'm just doing my job, okay? People love this stuff. They want the laughs, the gossip, the dirt. You're the one making this personal." Tom shook his head, a bitter smile crossing his lips. "Personal? You made it personal when you dragged my past onto that screen? You think you can humiliate me and call it your job? I've fought for everything I have, Jimmy. What have you fought for? A bigger desk? A louder laugh track?" The crowd erupted, some cheering for Tom, others stunned into silence. Jimmy's face reddened, his composure cracking as he realized the audience was slipping away from him. He glanced at his producers again, but they were frozen, the live broadcast locking them into this chaos. Tom didn't let up, his voice steady but fierce. "You want to play dirty, Jimmy? Let's talk about how you got this gig. How many people did you step over? How many backs did you stab to sit in that chair?" The accusation landed like a punch, and Jimmy's eyes widened, his silence louder than any comeback. The tension was unbearable, the studio a powder keg ready to explode. The studio was a pressure cooker, the audience hanging on every word as Tom Cruise's challenge echoed. "How many backs did you stab to sit in that chair?" Jimmy Fallon stood frozen, his face a mix of shock and fury, his usual charm buried under the weight of Tom's words. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, some whispering in agreement, others stunned by the raw confrontation unfolding live on air. Jimmy's eyes darted to the audience, searching for support, but the room felt split, and he was losing ground fast. He clenched his jaw, stepping out from behind his desk, his voice sharp and venomous as he fought to reclaim control. "You think you've got me figured out, don't you, Cruz?" Jimmy hissed, his tone bitter, almost spitting the words. "You stand. They're acting like some saint of Hollywood, but you're no different. You play the game, same as me, same as everyone. You think I don't know about the deals you've made? The strings you've pulled? The accusation was a wild swing, vague but vicious, meant to drag Tom down to his level. The audience stirred, some gasping, others leaning forward, hungry for what came next. Jimmy pointed a finger, his voice rising. You don't get to lecture me about hard work when you've got an army of people paving your way. Tom didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his gaze steady, cutting through Jimmy's bluster like a knife. Deals? Strings? He said, his voice calm, but laced with steel. I've spent 30 years earning my place, not stealing it. Every role I take, every stunt I do, that's me, not some team covering my mistakes. You want to talk about armies? Look at yourself, Jimmy. You've got writers feeding you lines, producers cleaning up your messes, and you still can't stand on your own. The crowd roared, some clapping, others shouting, feeding off Tom's fire. His words were a direct hit, and Jimmy's face twisted, his confidence crumbling. Desperate to turn the tide, Jimmy paced the stage, his hands waving wildly. You're full of it, Tom, he snapped, his voice cracking under the strain. You act like you're above the rest of us, but you're just a show-off who can't handle a little teasing. The audience wants this, they love it. He gestured to the crowd, but the response was mixed, some boos mixing with scattered cheers. Jimmy's eyes narrowed, and he went for a low blow. Maybe if you weren't so busy playing hero, you'd see nobody cares about your old movies anymore. They're here for the laughs, not your ego. The jab landed hard, and for a split second Tom's face flickered with something raw, a flash of hurt beneath the anger. But he recovered fast, stepping closer, his voice low and fierce. My movies? Those stories, those characters, they mean something to people, they inspire, they stay with you. What do you give them, Jimmy? A quick laugh they forget by morning? You're not building anything, you're just tearing down what others create. The audience erupted again, louder this time, many on their feet, cheering for Tom's passion. Jimmy staggered back, his bravado fading as the crowd's support shifted unmistakably to Tom. Jimmy tried one last jab, his voice shaky but defiant. You're delusional, Cruz. This is my show, my stage, and you don't get to come here and talk me down. But the words sounded hollow, and the audience wasn't buying it. Tom shook his head, a mix of pity and disgust in his eyes. Your show? He said softly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. This isn't your show anymore, Jimmy. You lost it the moment you chose cheap shots over respect. The crowd roared, the energy electric, as Jimmy stood speechless, his hands dropping to his sides, the fight draining out of him. Tom turned to the audience, his presence commanding, ready to take the moment to its peak. Tom Cruise stood center stage, his eyes sweeping the audience, their cheers washing over him like a wave of vindication. Jimmy Fallon, still behind his desk, looked small, deflated, his hands limp at his sides. The studio pulsed with energy, every eye fixed on Tom, who had turned the tables on the host who dared to mock his life's work. The air was thick with anticipation. The crowd sensing the final blow was coming. Tom's voice, steady and commanding, cut through the noise. This isn't about me, he said, his words clear, deliberate. It's about respect. For the work, for the struggle, for the people who believe in what we do. You don't get to tear that down for a laugh, Jimmy. You don't get to cheapen it. The audience roared, their applause shaking the room. Jimmy opened his mouth, grasping for a comeback, but his voice faltered. Come on, Tom. It's just entertainment, he muttered. But the words were weak, drowned out by the crowd's fervor. His eyes flicked to the producers, who stood frozen off stage, unable to stop the live broadcast's collapse. Tom took a step forward, his presence towering, not with physical size but with the weight of his conviction. Entertainment? He said, his voice rising, sharp but controlled. You call it entertainment when you drag someone's past through the mud? I've given everything to this craft, risked my life for it, and you think you can make it a joke because you've got a microphone? Jimmy's face flushed, his hands trembling as he tried to salvage his dignity. You're taking this too seriously, he said, forcing a laugh that sounded like a choke. The audience wants fun, not your preaching. But the crowd wasn't with him. Boos rippled through the seats, mixing with cheers for Tom. A woman in the front row shouted, "You tell him, Tom!" And the room erupted again. Jimmy's eyes widened, his control slipping away completely. He pointed at Tom, his voice shrill. "This is my stage, Cruz. You don't run this show." Tom's smile was cold, unyielding. "Not anymore, Jimmy. You ran it into the ground tonight." The audience leapt to their feet, their cheers deafening, a tidal wave of support crashing over Jimmy's crumbling defenses. Tom turned to them, his arms outstretched, his voice booming with passion. "You people, you're why I do this. You've stood by me, believed in me, and I'll never let someone like him take that away." The crowd roared louder, some clapping, others stomping, the studio vibrating with their energy. Jimmy slumped back into his chair, his face pale, his smirk gone. He tried one last jab, his voice barely audible. "You're just a showboat, Tom. Always have been." But the words fell flat, ignored by the crowd's thunderous approval of Tom. Tom faced Jimmy one last time, his voice calm now, triumphant. "You're wrong, Jimmy. I'm a man who stands for something. You? You're just noise." He turned back to the audience, raising a fist in solidarity. "Thank you for reminding me what this is all about." The crowd exploded, a standing ovation that shook the walls, their cheers carrying Tom's victory to the rafters. Jimmy sat silent, staring at his desk, the weight of his defeat sinking in. The cameras panned across the audience, capturing their fervor, as Tom walked off the stage, head high, leaving Jimmy alone in the wreckage of his own making. The show cut to commercial, but the moment was etched in history, a testament to a man who fought for his honor and won.